The rain came down in relentless sheets, turning the highway into a slick ribbon of silver. My son slowed the car to a crawl, rolled down the window, and stared straight ahead. His voice was flat, deliberate. "Mother, you need to learn a lesson." Then, without another word, he pressed the gas, the tires screaming against wet pavement as he left me standing alone on the shoulder of the empty road, 30 miles from home. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 70 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I clung to the belief that patience and love could mend any break in a family. But that night, under the pounding rain, I discovered something else. Silence can cut deeper than words. I didn't chase after him. I didn't plead. I simply stood still as his taillights vanished around the bend. Before the car disappeared completely, I reached into the open trunk and grabbed what I could. My hand closed around an umbrella, the one my late husband bought me during our honeymoon in Charleston. Its wooden handle was smooth with age, and though it creaked as I forced it open, it gave me just enough shelter to stand tall in the storm. What my son, Daniel, never realized was that the dash cam inside his car was still rolling. Every bitter word, every cold order, every second of my abandonment had been caught on camera. By morning, my lawyer would play that recording for a judge, and the deed to our family's $2.1 million lake house, the home Daniel and his wife, Clara, had been circling with greedy smiles, would be placed fully into my hands. He never imagined the storm he had unleashed. The rain blurred the highway lights into streaks of gold and silver. My coat grew heavy, soaked through within minutes. The old umbrella shook in my grip as thunder rolled, and the air filled with the raw, earthy scent of drenched soil. It brought me back to when Daniel was 7, trembling at the sound of thunder while we camped near the lake. He had clung to my arm then, whispering, "Don't let go, Mama." But now he was the one letting go. His words echoed in my head. "You need to learn a lesson." A lesson for what? For questioning the money that disappeared from our joint account. For refusing to sign the power of attorney papers Clara slid across my kitchen table last week. Or for nothing more than the sin of being old, inconvenient, and in their way. I want to believe it was just anger, but in my heart I knew better. I had seen the hardness in Daniel's eyes for months whenever the lake house came up. That house was never just property. It was my husband's promise that I would always have a refuge, a place for family to gather after he was gone. I had tended to it with care, oak beams polished, the porch swing freshly painted, photo albums neatly lined in the living room. To me, it was memory and love. To Daniel and Clara, it was currency. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a tactic. They thought the storm, the darkness, the miles would grind me down until I broke. That by morning, fear and exhaustion would push me into signing away what they wanted. But they had miscalculated. I may be 70, but I carried decades of lessons they never saw coming. Raising a child alone taught me endurance. Keeping the books for my husband's small business taught me numbers. Widowhood taught me resilience. And silence taught me strength. I had been keeping records for months. Every tense exchange with Daniel, every irregularity in the accounts, every careless remark Clara let slip, I wrote it all down. And now I had something stronger than notes, the Dashcam, a witness without bias, without hesitation, capturing every cruel second of my son pushing me out into the storm. Cars hissed past in the distance, headlights briefly carving through the downpour before vanishing again into the black night. I didn't raise my hand for help. I didn't call out. Instead, I closed the umbrella, lifted my chin into the rain, and started walking. Each step was heavy, water sloshing in my shoes, but my heart did not falter. I wasn't alone in this. My brother, Elliot, was waiting at the rest stop a few miles ahead. Elliot had always been my anchor, a man of principle, sometimes blunt to the point of discomfort, but steady when it mattered most. Earlier that evening, before Daniel pulled his cruel stunt, I had whispered 3 words into the phone. "It's happening tonight." Ellie understood. The rain pounded against me as I walked, each drop like a drumbeat of resolve. Daniel thought he was teaching me submission, forcing me into silence. But he didn't realize the only lesson carved into that night was one meant for him. By the time dawn broke, I wasn't the one trembling in front of Judge. My son was. Later, wrapped in a blanket in Elliot's truck, the storm easing outside, my mind drifted backward the way it always did when the present felt unbearable. I was 38 again, standing at a cemetery. One hand rested on my husband's casket, the other clutching Daniel's small, shaking fingers. He was 8, his face blotchy from tears. "Don't leave me too, Mama," he had whispered. That plea burrowed into me, so deeply it became a vow I never stopped carrying. From then on, my life was divided between grief and responsibility. My heart broke daily, but I still had to cook, clean, earn, and guide. I walked Daniel to school until the day he insisted he was too old, too embarrassed. Yet I remember the sweat of his palm pressed into mine, the way he puffed out his chest with pride, carrying his lunchbox down the hallway. I wore every role: mother and father, comforter and disciplinarian, worker and dreamer. We had little, but I stretched every dollar. Shoes for school, second-hand bicycles for Christmas, enough tucked away for field trips. The only thing I never compromised on was the lake house. That place had been my husband's dream, his promise that our family would always have a refuge. When the world grows too heavy, Evelyn, he used to say, go back to the water. It listens when people don't. After he was gone, the house became my lifeline. On weekends, I bundled Daniel into our rusted sedan and drove north. We fished from the dock, roasted corn on the porch, and once, during a sudden storm, we played board games by candlelight while thunder shook the windows. Those were the nights that stitched me back together. I believed I was raising a boy who would always treasure home above profit. But time is a way of bending dreams. By the time Daniel finished college, the lake house wasn't a sanctuary in his eyes. It was an asset. What started as offhand jokes about taxes and maintenance costs hardened into pointed reminders. To him and Clara, the lake wasn't memory or love. It was leverage. When Daniel married Clara, the pressure doubled. She knew how to charm a room. Warm smiles at neighborhood gatherings, compliments about my pies at church suppers. But when the doors closed, her tone turned sharp as broken glass. "It's too much for you, Evelyn," she would sigh. "That house is crumbling. Why not let us take care of it? You could sell, move into something smaller, safer. Don't you want peace of mind?" Peace of mind. She used the phrase like a blade, polishing it until it cut. She wore the mask of a caretaker, but beneath it, all I saw was calculation. I noticed the way her hand lingered on the mantel when she visited the lake house, her eyes roaming the space, not with affection, but with appraisal. She didn't see Daniel's first fishing photo or the press garden flowers I had framed with care. She saw square footage, resale value, profit margins. Each time she pressed me, I bit down on my anger. I reminded myself she was my son's wife, the mother of his children. I tried to believe her words carried concern, but the truth gnawed at me. Clara wasn't looking out for me. She was looking to erase me, to strip away memory and replace it with money. At night, I often sat on the porch swing, the boards creaking under my weight, and wondered if my husband would have seen it coming. He left that house as a promise, something solid to hold on to. Permanence, he believed, would keep us rooted. But permanence means little when greed chips away at it. My fingers would trace the initials carved into the railing, his and mine, etched one warm summer evening, and I would whisper, "I'm still here. I'll protect it, even if it's only me left to do it." Daniel noticed, of course. He saw the hesitation in my eyes each time Clara slid a folder across the table. His voice grew colder with every refusal. "You're being stubborn, Mom," he would snap. "You don't realize how hard we're working to keep things in order. Let's handle it." That sharp edge, once reserved for boardrooms and deals, was now aimed squarely at me. It is a grief all its own to watch the boy you once carried on your hip become a man who sees you not as his mother, but as an obstacle. The same child who once clung to my hand and begged me never to leave him had already abandoned me, first in spirit, and now, in the storm, in body too. That night, sitting beside Elliot in his truck, watching rain slide down the glass, I finally understood. The fracture in our family hadn't begun on that highway. It started years earlier, with Clara's gentle suggestions, with Daniel's clipped remarks, with papers slid across the table and signed. The storm only stripped away the disguise. The first sign had been so small I nearly ignored it, a $30 withdrawal I couldn't place. I convinced myself it was a forgotten subscription, something Daniel had set up years ago when he helped me open online banking. A week later, it happened again. 90 this time, then an even 100. Soon a pattern emerged. Small amounts, spread out carefully. Then one sharp spike, as if testing whether I was paying attention. I pulled out every statement I could find, laid them across the kitchen table, and circled the dates, scribbled notes in the margins. The old bookkeeper in me stirred awake. Numbers never lie. If you listen, they tell you everything. That afternoon, Clara breezed in, her smile fixed in place. She unpacked a bag of groceries, set them neatly on the counter, then slid a manila folder onto the table. "Just simple paperwork," she said sweetly, tapping the edge. "A springing power of attorney. Harmless," she insisted. "It would only activate if something happened to me. Only if I needed help. Peace of mind." That was Clara's phrase, sweetened like honey but sharp beneath. She slid the folder across the table and waited. I didn't touch it. "Why now?" I asked. "And why the rush?" She gave a light laugh, the kind meant to sound harmless. "Because fraud is everywhere. And you keep forgetting passwords. Let's make things easier. Daniel can manage the accounts and the insurance. You deserve to rest. Just sign here, here, and here." I glanced at the grocery bag she had unpacked, a receipt still clinging to a tomato. "Leave it with me," I said. "I read what I sign." Her smile faltered, just for a moment. "Of course. Just don't wait too long. Timing is everything." When the door closed behind her, I picked up the phone and called Clara, my oldest friend, the one who had spent decades as a court clerk. She listened in silence, then cleared her throat in the way she once did to settle entire courtrooms. "Evelyn, don't sign a thing until I've looked at it. And start a paper trail. Notebook by the phone. Write dates, times, what was said, who was there. If they pressure you, write that too." "I trust my son," I said, though even to my own ears the words sounded fragile. "You trust the boy you raised," she answered gently. "The man in front of you may be under different pressures. Get a Dashcam. If you still ride with Daniel, suggest one in his car too. Call it safety. Remember, memory is weather. Video is stone." The next morning, Elliot stopped by with a community lawyer on his way to the clinic. I poured coffee while they combed through the bank statements I had printed. Elliot tapped one page. "These aren't accidents. Whoever is pulling money knows how to keep it under automated alerts. Look at the alternating amounts. The dates." I told them about the folder, about Clara's repeated use of peace of mind. Elliot closed his eyes briefly, then fixed me with a steady look. "You've given Daniel too much for too long. His first car, half his rent in grad school, cleaning up his credit when he slipped. You thought you were protecting him. What you taught him is that your net has no bottom." His words weren't cruel, but they cut clean, like a scalpel. I gripped the counter. "So what now? Now you act like your life has the same worth as anyone's," he said. "We make copies of everything, store them in more than one place, freeze what can be frozen, and you stop riding alone with Daniel until this plays out." That afternoon, I bought a Dashcam. The clerk installed it, showed me how the footage looped on a card. I thought of Clara's phrase again, "Memory is weather, video is stone," as I drove home with the small blinking light at the corner of the mirror, steady as a heartbeat. Clara texted twice that evening. "Just checking if you signed. I can run it to the notary." Then another, "No pressure, but if we finish by Friday, there are tax advantages." I typed, deleted, and finally set the phone face down. Instead, I wrote both messages in the notebook, date and time included. At first I felt ridiculous, like a spy in my own kitchen. Then the feeling shifted. Writing it down gave me calm. Paper doesn't rush. Paper waits. When Daniel called, his voice was polished, the same tone he used with clients. "Mom, Claire's only trying to help. You're overreacting to small withdrawals. They don't matter. Let me streamline things. You taught me to be efficient. I taught you to be decent," I said. The silence on the other end stretched, long and heavy. "Bring the documents back," I added. "We'll review them with Clara present." He exhaled hard. "She doesn't understand modern finance. She worked in a courthouse, not a bank. She understands signatures," I told him, "and she understands pressure." That night, I slept lightly, the notebook on my nightstand, the Dashcam's memory card tucked inside a teacup in the drawer. In the morning, I walked to the lake and stood on the dock. The water held the reflection of the sky, wide but not endless. I understood then, a boundary isn't cruelty. It is care with edges. 2 days later, the withdrawal spiked. Not 30, not 90, 800, then 1020. Evelyn Carter sat stiffly in the leather chair as the branch manager scrolled through her account. The screen glowed green against the woman's face, every flicker sharpening the pit in Evelyn's stomach. Finally, the manager stopped, brow furrowing. "These authorizations are tied to a secondary login," she said, tilting the monitor. "Delegated access. Do you recognize this email?" Evelyn's chest tightened. She did. It was Daniel's. Her son's. She thanked the manager, froze the credentials, and walked out of the bank with her shoulders higher than they had been in years. Outside, the lake wind whipped her hair, sharp and cool. The boundary had held. For the moment, it had held. Rain fell hard, a storm that seemed to strike from the ground as much as the sky. It stung her cheeks, seeped into her shoes until each step squelched against the asphalt. The road stretched on like black glass, empty and endless, only interrupted by the fleeting glow of passing headlights. Evelyn walked slowly, not because she expected Daniel to turn back. He would not. But because each step bore the weight of years of trust ground down to dust. Her umbrella sagged under the downpour, fabric trembling as if exhausted alongside her. Memories pressed against her ribs. Daniel, small and frightened, crawling in her bed during thunderstorms. His little voice whispering, "Hold me, Mama. Don't let go." And now he had let go, left her on the shoulder of a highway, not abandoned by a storm, but by the boy she had once promised never to abandon. The world blurred, glowing gas stations in the distance, the smear of red taillights, water sliding across the blacktop. The rain slowed her body, but sharpened her mind. The betrayal stung sharper than the cold. Daniel had calculated the distance, 32 miles. Too far to walk, too far for a cab. Just far enough to leave her stranded between humiliation and despair. But he didn't know what humiliation does. It burns off like fog, and despair hardens into something else. Resolve. Headlights appeared in the distance, slower than the rest. The beams cut through the rain, growing larger until Evelyn recognized the boxy outline of an old pickup. It slowed, pulled over, and stopped a few feet ahead. The driver's door creaked open. Clara Carter stepped out, rain slicking her dark hair to her temples. Evelyn's daughter-in-law. Stern, steady Clara. She carried a heavy wool blanket and a dented thermos. No questions, no accusations. Just the blanket wrapped firm around Evelyn's shoulders and the thermos pressed into her shaking hands. The rising steam fogged Evelyn's glasses. Clara watched her sip, eyes steady, jaw set. Then she spoke, her voice flat but certain. "Enough, Evelyn. It's time." The words struck heavier than the storm itself. Time for what? Time to stop hoping Daniel would change. Time to stop believing patience could mend what greed had broken. Evelyn looked at Clara, at the certainty in her face, and she understood. It was time to fight, but not with anger or shouting. With paper, with records, with the quiet stones Evelyn had been gathering for months. She climbed into the truck. The blanket clung warm to her, the thermos pressed close to her chest. The cab smelled of old leather, a faint trace of hay, reminders of steadier years, of a life that had felt whole. The wipers beat back the storm in a steady rhythm. Clara kept her eyes on the road, leaving Evelyn space to find her words. I didn't argue when he told me to get out. Evelyn said at last, her voice low. I just stepped out. That was the right choice, Clara replied. You don't have to match cruelty with noise. Silence holds its own weight. Evelyn turned toward the streaked glass, watching water blur the night into streaks of silver and black. Silence. It had been her companion for years. But now it would be her weapon. Silence when Daniel brushed me off at family dinners. Silence when Clara slid folders across the kitchen table. Silence when small withdrawals vanished from my account like crumbs swept away by invisible hands. I had stayed quiet for years, to keep peace, to avoid conflict, to protect the fragile closeness that remained. But tonight, silence was no longer surrender. It was a weapon. My fingers found the notebook tucked in my bag. Pages filled with dates, amounts, and words sharp enough to burn memory alone. I pictured the dash cam blinking quietly in Daniel's car, recording every moment of his cruelty, storing it for later. For once, silence was not erasure. It was proof. Elliot steered us down back roads, avoiding the highway. He had planned every detail. I felt the truck bump over potholes, smelled the wet earth drifting in through the vents. Each jolt grounded me, shifting me from helpless mother to something stronger, a witness, a guardian, a woman who still had choices. The rain softened as we neared town, turning into mist. I caught my reflection in the window, damp hair plastered to my cheeks, pale skin, eyes sharper than I remembered. I looked like someone standing on a threshold. Behind me, years of compromise, bending so Daniel wouldn't break. Ahead of me, the storm that might finally strip everything bare. I pressed the thermos closer, warmth spreading into my bones. For the first time in years, I felt steady. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't need to chase Daniel or demand his love. I only needed to let silence speak, to let truth outlast the weather of his excuses. As Elliot turned down his street, he glanced at me. Are you ready? I wrapped the blanket tighter, the smell of wool mingling with damp air. I've been ready, I said. I just needed tonight to remind me. The truck stopped outside his house. Warm light spilled from the porch against the dark, wet night. I stepped out, blanket like armor, umbrella folded, rain dripping in rivulets off the fabric. Behind me, the highway stretched empty. Ahead, a door waited. I paused, letting the last drops fall on my face, then stepped inside. Elliot's dining room had become a command center. Stacks of bank statements covered the table, each sheet marked with sticky notes in his precise handwriting. A desk lamp cast a yellow pool of light over the documents, while the storm rattled the windows. He handed me a pen. Circle everything you don't recognize, he said. Amounts, dates, anything that twists your stomach. I slid on my glasses and began scanning the pages. Small withdrawals, scattered over months. Harmless looking until the pattern emerged. 30 here, 90 there, then 800, 1,020. Testing the waters, probing limits without triggering alarms. My pen froze over one date in particular, the day Daniel had taken me to lunch at the steakhouse, smiling across the table, insisting on dessert. That afternoon, $1,200 had vanished. I circled it hard, tearing the paper slightly. Elliot didn't flinch. Good, he said. Mark it all. Anger helps steady the hand. We moved on to emails Clara had printed, showing me how to archive copies. Polite notes from Clara, reminding me about the power of attorney forms. Daniel's clipped replies, corporate and cold, as if I were just another client filling his inbox. One note from Clara read, "If we complete the paperwork this week, we can secure certain tax advantages. Don't delay. Peace of mind, Evelyn." I had underlined those words in my mind. Peace of mind. Clara's voice carried the sweetness of perfume and the subtle sting of a blade. Elliot spread the next stack of papers across the table. Receipts notarized for repairs and maintenance on the lake house. "Keep these," he said. "They prove you've been the one paying. Ownership isn't just a signature. It's action." I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The weight of it all pressed down like the storm clouds, still hanging heavy outside. "It feels like drowning," I whispered. "Breathe differently," Elliot replied. "This isn't drowning. It's swimming with rocks. But you could drop them one by one until only the truth stays in your hands." That night, exhaustion pressed against me, so I checked into a small roadside and under my maiden name. The room was modest. 2 twin beds, a nightstand, a flickering lamp. I unpacked slowly. Pajamas, a toothbrush, the flash drive with copies of every file, and the Dashcam card Elliot had pulled from Daniel's car earlier. I brewed chamomile tea in the tiny kettle. My husband used to call it my thinking drink, the one I made when decisions weighed heavy. I poured it into a paper cup, sat at the desk, and opened my notebook. The Dashcam footage played on my laptop. Rain streaked the screen, headlights glaring, and Daniel's voice cut through sharp and cold. "You need to be taught a lesson. 32 miles should do it. Walk home, Mom." I paused the video, staring at his frozen expression. My son, my only child, mouth twisted in a way I'd never seen in his father. I closed the laptop, letting silence fill the room. Then I picked up my pen and began to write. Not a statement for court, not notes for Elliot, but a letter I would never send. "Daniel, when you were little, you gripped my hand so tightly I thought you'd never let go. You promised you'd protect me like I protected you. I believed you. Tonight, you left me on the side of the road like I was nothing. I don't know what broke inside you, but I know this. I will not let your cruelty erase the years I carried you, fed you, fought for you. You may want me small, silent, erased. Instead, I will stand. I will do it without shouting. The truth will do the shouting for me." I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer beneath the kettle, steam from the tea curling up around it. That letter wasn't for Daniel. It was for me. Proof my voice still lived, even if no one heard it. The next morning, Clara arrived, briefcase in hand, hair pinned neatly back as always. She laid out forms, highlighted key sections, explained which documents would carry the most weight in court. Her voice was calm, almost soothing. "Judges don't want drama," she said. "They want clarity. The Dashcam is your anchor. Everything else is the tide around it." Elliot nodded. "We file an emergency petition. Grounds, abandonment, financial coercion, attempted fraud. With this evidence, the court can freeze assets until a full hearing." Clara placed her hand over mine. "You'll walk into that courtroom steady, Evelyn. You don't need to say much. Let the papers speak. Let his own voice on that tape hang him." That night, Back in a hotel, I made another cup of tea and sat by the window. The rain had stopped, puddles shimmering under the streetlights like broken mirrors. I thought about thresholds, the moments when you choose to step forward or stay behind. My husband's voice whispered in my memory, soft but certain. The water listens when people don't. I pressed my palms to the glass and whispered into the quiet room. It's time. For the first time in years, I believed myself. I trusted Clara the way some people trust family. She had been at my husband's funeral, tissues tucked in her sleeve, never once telling me to be strong. When I noticed the money disappearing, she was the first person I called. So when Elliot handed me a printed email one afternoon, my stomach dropped. The note was short, clinical, nothing like the careful, warm messages Clara usually sent. The header showed Melissa's address. My hand shook as I read. If you can guide Evelyn toward a quick resolution, Daniel and I can ensure you're compensated for your time. Consider it a consulting fee, $5,000 up front. More once the lake house is in our name. I sat at Elliot's kitchen table, paper trembling between my fingers. She wouldn't. Clara wouldn't. Elliot's voice was calm. Evelyn, people make choices when money is dangled in front of them. Don't ignore it. Prepare for the possibility she's not as solid as you think. I folded the page and tucked it into my notebook. That night at the hotel, I didn't brew tea. I just sat at the desk, staring at the flickering lamp, the letter to Daniel resting in the drawer. How many betrayals could one heart endure? Losing a son to greed was one wound. Losing a friend to the same hunger was another kind of grief entirely. 2 days later, Clara arrived at the courthouse. She looked the same as always, hair pinned back, skirt pressed, briefcase in hand, but I noticed a flicker in her eyes, the tightening of her fingers around the handle. In the hallway, she leaned close. Evelyn, maybe it's not worth the fight. Houses are just wood and stone. Family is blood. Sometimes giving a little keeps the peace. Family is blood. Her words scraped against me. Did she mean Daniel carried my blood? Was she suggesting surrender was love? I pressed my lips together and let silence answer. I walked into the courtroom alone. The judge called the case. Elliot stood with the petition. The Dashcam clip was cued, the bank statement stacked neatly. Daniel sat across the aisle, polished in a navy suit. Melissa beside him, chin lifted, as if victory was already theirs. My heart thumped, but I kept my hands folded, waiting for the storm to break. When the judge asked for testimony, Elliot nodded toward Clara. She hesitated, heels clicking as she approached the bench. For a moment, I braced myself, tasting the bitterness of betrayal in the air. Then Clara spoke. Your Honor, I was approached by Mrs. Carter's daughter-in-law last week. I was offered money to encourage Evelyn to sign documents relinquishing control of her property. I received the email, but I did not accept the offer, and I could not live with myself if I stayed silent. The room shifted. Daniel's face went pale. Melissa's hand flew to her pearls, clutching them as if to hold herself upright. Elliot's jaw tightened, but his eyes met mine, calm, sure. Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. I've known Evelyn for 40 years. She is cautious, steady, and truthful. She sought my help because she sensed her trust was being manipulated. I've reviewed the emails, the withdrawals, and the Dashcam footage. In my professional opinion, there is clear evidence of coercion and abandonment. I closed my eyes briefly, letting her words settle, letting the quiet weight of truth fill the room. Betrayal had touched me, but loyalty returned with a stronger, sharper edge. It was not perfect. Clara had hesitated, tempted by Melissa's offer, but in the end, she stood beside me. That choice carried weight, heavier than any argument or plea. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have copies of the correspondence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Clara said, holding the printed email aloft. "For the record." A hush settled over the courtroom. Daniel shifted in his seat, whispering to Melissa, whose face had turned deep crimson. I felt no triumph, only a quiet, charged stillness, like the calm after a storm when the air feels thick with electricity. Clara returned to her seat without meeting my eyes. She folded her hands in her lap, shoulders squared. I wanted to reach out, to forgive instantly, but forgiveness moves slower than truth. Instead, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote down the time, her exact words, the way the room had shifted. Later, under the courthouse awning, she finally met my eyes. "I almost failed you," she admitted. "I thought taking their offer might shield you from worse battles." I remembered the woman I had always known, the one who never ran from storms. "You didn't need protection from the truth. You needed it revealed." I nodded, the misting rain curling around us. "We'll talk about forgiveness later. For now, thank you for standing." She exhaled, trembling. "For now, that's enough." The lake house had always carried my husband's presence, though he had been gone decades. The banisters still bore the polish of his hands. The porch swing creaked in the same rhythm as when he read the paper there, tapping the page for me to hear a line. Yet it was the small details that struck hardest. The chipped ceramic mug in the cupboard, the faded fishing hat hanging by the door. That night, Elliot insisted we check the old safe in the study. Hidden behind shelves of water-stained paperbacks, it seemed forgotten until you saw ghosts. He crouched, brushing dust aside, and worked the dial with steady hands. After a long silence, the click sounded. The door opened with a soft creak, like a long exhale. Inside lay a folder, edges curled, pages yellowed with age. Elliot lifted it carefully, setting it on the desk. "It's yours to open, Evelyn." My hands trembled as I untied the string. The first page bore my husband's handwriting, broad, steady at first, tapering to a faint quiver near the end. Ink had bled in spots, tiny blotches where the pen pressed too hard. I traced his name with my fingertips, whispering it like a prayer. It was his will, written by hand, never notarized but unmistakable. He left the lake house to me with one line underlined twice. "This house belongs to Evelyn until her last breath. No one else decides otherwise." Behind it was a shorter, more intimate letter. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know you carry more than your share. You will sacrifice because that is who you are, but do not sacrifice yourself. Do not let anyone, even our son, treat you as an afterthought. This house is more than wood and stone. It is proof of our life together. Promise me you'll guard it. And promise me you'll never let anyone make you small. I love you always, Henry." The ink was blurred where his hand lingered, as if he had paused mid-sentence, holding back tears. I felt the weight of his words settle into me, anchoring me, reminding me why I had fought, why I would continue to stand. My chest tightened until every breath felt like fire. All the years I had endured Melissa's barbed compliments, Daniel's dismissive tones, the slow erosion of my authority. It was as if Henry had known. His words reached across time, steadying me like a hand on my shoulder. I pressed the letter to my chest, fragile paper against my heart, the words indelible. For a long stretch, I could not speak. Only the rain tapping steadily against the eaves filled the room. Finally, Elliot broke the silence. "That's your anchor," he said softly. "No court can ignore a husband's will written in his own hand. And no son should dare." I whispered. I sank into Henry's old chair, the leather worn and cracked, and laid the pages flat on the desk. My tears fell, darkening spots where the ink had already bled. A strange thought came to me. His handwriting and my tears, decades apart, now sharing the same fibers, a conversation across time. I remember that last night Henry spent in this house before he was gone. He had sat at this same desk, pen scratching late while I brewed tea. I hadn't asked what he was writing. I thought it was just another ledger. Now I knew it had been a love letter disguised as a will. The storm outside intensified, the lake roiling beneath heavy clouds. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill me. I could almost hear Henry's calm, unyielding voice. "Don't let anyone make you small." Melissa's sharp smiles, Daniel's cold silences. They no longer felt like immovable walls. They felt like tests. And I had been handed the answer key. I slid the letter into a protective sleeve, placed it in Elliot's briefcase, and watched as he snapped it shut. "We'll copy it, notarize it, preserve it 6 ways over," he said, his voice softening. "But keep the original close. That's not just evidence, Evelyn. That's Henry reaching through time to back you up." Later, in my hotel room, I brewed tea again. Steam rose in the dim light, curling like a quiet blessing. I opened my notebook and wrote Henry's line at the top of the page. "Don't let anyone treat you as an afterthought." Beneath it, I added my own vow. "I will not." The paper felt warm beneath my wrist. I thought of the Dashcam card tucked in my bag, the bank statement spread across Elliot's table, Clara's honest, faltering testimony. And now this, the will and the letter. Each piece was a stone, together forming a wall no storm could breach. I pressed the letter between clean pages of my notebook, close enough to feel its weight. More than inheritance, it was instruction, a final lesson from the man who had loved me without condition. I lifted my tea and whispered into the steam, "Thank you, Henry. I hear you. I'll keep the promise." The rain outside slowed to a gentle patter. For the first time in years, I felt not just ready, but held by memory, by words on trembling paper, by the quiet strength of a love that refused to vanish. The Dashcam had been a silent witness, a blinking light in Daniel's car. It had captured the cruel command, the slam of the door, the night he left me in the rain. But Elliot, meticulous as always, suggested we watch it again, closely. At his kitchen table, the briefcase with Henry's will beside us, he slid the memory card into the laptop. The footage began. Headlights blurred across the screen. Daniel leaned across the seat, his mouth tight, voice clipped. You need to be taught a lesson. My body tensed to hearing the words again. Elliot froze the frame, rewound, and pressed play once more. Then a sound I had missed the first time filled the room. The faint click of a Bluetooth connecting. A woman's voice, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the speakers. "Clara, did it go as planned?" Daniel's laugh followed, sharp and triumphant. "She's out now. No ride, no hope. 32 miles from home. By morning, she'll be begging to sign." My breath caught. Elliot turned up the volume. Clara's voice came again, cold and deliberate. "Good. Once she signs, the house is ours. No more delays. She's too soft. She always folds." The words cut deeper than any storm ever had. My own son treating me like a piece of paper to be signed away. Elliot leaned back, folding his arms. "This," he said slowly, "is gold. Abandonment captured on video. Conspiracy caught in audio. The judge won't need to guess anything. He'll hear it with his own ears." I fixed my eyes on the screen, on Daniel's face frozen in the dashboard glow. I traced the features I had known when he was a boy. The curve of his cheek, the arch of his brow. The child who once clung to my skirt on the first day of school was gone. In his place stood a man who saw his mother as an obstacle. My chest ached, but I stayed steady. I reached for my notebook and recorded the timestamp, the words, every detail. Then I closed it, letting silence stretch across the room. "Nora," Elliot said, leaning closer, "this is the turning point." He thought the Dashcam was just a toy. He didn't realize it had ears, too. "This isn't just evidence. It's his own confession." I nodded slowly. Let him confess, I thought. Let the court hear exactly what I heard. That night, back in my hotel room, I played the clip again. The rain tapped against the window, echoing the hiss of the recording. Daniel's voice filled the room. "She'll fold. She always does." I closed my eyes. The ache was sharp, but beneath it lay clarity. He no longer saw me, not as a mother, not as a woman with choices. He saw weakness. That blindness would be his undoing. I brewed tea in the small kettle, poured it into the same paper cup as the night before, and opened my notebook. I wrote his words across the page. "She'll fold. She always does." Beneath it, I wrote my answer. "Not this time." The ink bled slightly under my hand. I let it dry and slid the notebook beside Henry's letter. Two voices now. My husband's warning, my son's betrayal, anchoring me in opposite ways. One teaching me never to be diminished, the other assuming I already was. I sat at the desk, tea cooling, and whispered to the empty room, "You don't know me anymore, Daniel. But you will." The Dashcam card rested in its sleeve, ordinary, unassuming. Yet it held the storm, the cruelty, the arrogance, condensed into mere megabytes. I touched it gently, as if it were glass, though in truth it was stronger than steel. Later, Elliot called. His voice was firm but gentle. "Rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow we start assembling exhibits. Dashcam goes first. No one argues with a camera." I thanked him and let the line go quiet. I looked once more at the blinking cursor on the laptop, then shut it down. I didn't need to see the footage again. It was etched into me, not as pain, but as proof. As I turned off the light, Henry's words returned to me. "Don't let anyone make you an afterthought." And I realized that exposing Daniel's callousness hadn't, just documented a crime. It had restored my place in the story, not as the mother left stranded on the roadside, but as the witness who carried the truth into daylight. You said the courthouse smelled of aged paper and polish, the kind of scent that lingers where decisions shape lives. Elliot walked beside me, his briefcase heavy with documents, his jaw tight with focus. Clara followed, shoulders squared, carrying her own weight of responsibility. With a bailiff called the case, I rose, knees steady even as my heart thumped. Across the aisle, Daniel sat in a navy suit that looked sharper than the morning light. Melissa beside him, hair pinned into a flawless bun. Her smile faltered when she spotted Henry's will in Elliot's hand. Judge Reynolds entered, robe brushing the floor, his gaze calm but impatient. This is an emergency hearing regarding alleged abandonment, financial coercion, and disputed ownership of the Mitchell Lake property. Counsel, present your evidence. Elliot stepped forward. Your Honor, before introducing financial records, we request the court view Exhibit A, the Dashcam recording. The judge nodded. Lights dimmed, the screen flickered on, and my stomach tightened as the grainy footage filled the room. Daniel's profile glowed in the dashboard light, jaw set as he ordered me out. The storm roared in the background. Then his voice, cold and deliberate. You need to be taught a lesson. 32 miles should do it. Walk home, Mom. Gasps echoed. Melissa paled. Daniel tugged at his tie. Then the Bluetooth clicked. Melissa's voice came through, unmistakable. Did you do it? Daniel laughed, triumphant. She's out now. 32 miles from home. No ride, no chance. She'll crack before morning. By tomorrow, she'll be begging to sign. The silence that followed weighed heavier than any gavel. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Is that your voice, Mr. Carter? Daniel stammered. It's taken out of context. I was joking. She misunderstood. The judge arched an eyebrow. That does not sound like a joke. He motioned to Elliot. Continue. Elliot rose calmly. Your Honor, Exhibit B, bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals from Mrs. Carter's accounts over the past 18 months. Exhibit C, emails from Mrs. Nelson pressuring my client to sign over power of attorney. Exhibit D, Mr. Carter's own voice conspiring with his wife to obtain the lake house. As copies were distributed, my breath steadied. I had imagined this moment for weeks, but reality was sharper, harsher. To hear my son's betrayal played aloud, to witness his arrogance displayed like evidence of weather, was almost unbearable. Almost. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to make a statement? I placed my palms lightly on the table. My voice was steady, though a tremor lingered. Yes, Your Honor. My son told me I needed a lesson. He was right. There was a lesson, but it was his. The words hung in the room long after I sat. Daniel leaned toward Melissa, whispering urgently, but she kept her gaze on the floor. Judge Reynolds removed his glasses, tapped them against the bench. The evidence is clear. Mr. Carter abandoned his mother 32 miles from home during a storm. The recording confirms intent to coerce her into surrendering property. Financial documents and corroborating testimony establish a pattern of abuse. He paused, eyes heavy on Daniel. The judge's voice carried across the courtroom with steady authority. This court rules that the Mitchell Lake House remains the sole property of Mrs. Evelyn Carter, honoring both her documented stewardship and the written intentions of her late husband. My breath left me in one long, shuddering exhale. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, a temporary restraining order is in place. Mr. and Mrs. Nelson are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Carter until further review. All marital accounts are frozen pending investigation into potential financial misconduct. A full hearing will follow. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel muttered something under his breath, a protest, or perhaps an oath, but the bailiff's gaze silenced him instantly. I sat still, feeling the weight of the wool blanket from Elliot's truck across my shoulders, though I wore only my jacket. Relief washed over me quietly, not in cheers, but in the slow release of held tension, like letting air finally escape from lungs long compressed. Judge Reynolds leaned back. Mrs. Carter, this court recognizes your perseverance. Justice may not erase pain, but it restores equilibrium. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, crisp and final. The courtroom stirred. Papers shuffled. Murmurs rose. Reporters scribbled notes. Clara's hand, still trembling, covered mine. You were unwavering, she whispered, steadier than anyone here. Elliot closed his briefcase with a quiet click. It's done for now. The rest will follow, he said. As I stepped beneath the courthouse arches, the sun broke through thinning clouds. Reporters called my name. Microphones stretched forward, but I said nothing. Silence was my shield, my proof. Inside, I whispered to Henry's memory. I had kept the house. I had kept my place. I had not folded. For the first time since that stormy night, I felt anchored, not abandoned. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Daniel shot to his feet. His chair scraped against the floor, sharp as a blade. This is ridiculous, he shouted, voice cutting through the murmurs. She's not a widow in need. She's manipulative, always has been. Ask anyone. She's spinning a sob story to turn everyone against me. Judge Reynolds lifted a hand, sharp and commanding. Mr. Carter, you will restrain yourself. But Daniel barreled on, face flushed red. You think she's a saint? She's been hiding money for years. Controlling, paranoid. She probably staged this entire thing just to humiliate me. He jabbed a finger toward me. She's not the victim. She's the problem. I did not move. Hands folded, gaze steady. Let him unravel, I thought. Each word only tightened a rope around his own neck. Melissa tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but her own composure had cracked. Her eyes darted toward the gallery, aware of the reporters witnessing everything. The damage was spreading. Judge Reynolds slammed the gavel once more. Enough, Mr. Carter. One more outburst, and you'll be held in contempt. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument I could have made. I let it settle, letting it hold the weight for me. Later, in a marble hallway outside, I glimpsed Melissa's phone as she typed rapidly, back turned, glancing down the corridor as if checking who might be watching. Elliot noticed too, his eyes narrowing. We didn't confront her then. That evening, back at his dining table, Elliot spread a fresh stack of papers before me. I had a contact at the county clerk's office pull a search, he said. Daniel's been busy. I braced myself as he laid out the documents, recent mortgage filings, liens, signatures, all bearing Daniel's name. The pattern was clear, a web of activity meant to mask his intent. But now, with the court ruling and the evidence stacked, the walls I had built from years of careful notes, dashcam footage, and Henry's guidance stood unbreachable. He mortgaged the lake house twice, Elliot said, voice flat, eyes unreadable. Without your knowledge, without consent, using falsified documents claiming you authorized him years ago. He pulled out equity, hundreds of thousands. The bank's already asking questions since the title is frozen. My chest tightened. So while pretending to protect me, he was quietly stealing. Elliot nodded. Melissa's likely moving the funds. That's what she was doing in the hallway, trying to shift money before it's locked down. But her trail is sloppy. He's panicking. Clara, notepad open, shook her head. Judges don't overlook forged mortgages. That's criminal, not just civil. I leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Henry's letter came to mind, his handwriting firm despite tremors. Don't let anyone make you small. David had tried precisely that, reducing me to a name, a signature, a tool to manipulate. I won't yell, I said finally. I won't scream, but I will not be erased. Elliot's jaw tightened. Good. This fight isn't over. Today we secure the house. Tomorrow we expose the forgery. After that, fraud. He tapped the stack of mortgage documents. Every lie he's told is closing in. That night, in the quiet of the hotel room, I brewed tea, the paper cup warming my hands, anchoring me. I replayed the hearing, the flare of Daniel's anger, Melissa's restless eyes, the gavel striking like distant thunder. Elliot's calm voice threaded through my memory. I opened my notebook and wrote down Daniel's words. She's not a victim. She's the problem. Beneath them, I wrote, if being the problem means refusing to fold, then let me be the problem he cannot solve. The ink bled into the page, dark and deliberate. I slid Henry's letter on top and whispered to the room, the lesson is yours now, Daniel. And it won't be easy. The rain had stopped outside. The night felt quiet, but inside, the storm of reckoning was building, not to break me, but to reveal every hidden debt, every buried lie. Elliot was the first to trace the threads to Melissa, the forged mortgages, the sudden withdrawals, the pressure to sign. Daniel wasn't acting alone. Notes in the margins of drafts, precise and meticulous, bore her style. Melissa had always been organized, but now that skill revealed itself as calculated ambition. We confronted her in the courthouse corridor a week later. Daniel had stormed off, still bristling from the restraining order. Melissa stayed, lips painted, posture perfect. For the first time, her gaze met mine directly. No point pretending anymore, she said quietly. The lake house isn't sentimental. Do you know what it could be worth as a rental? Waterfront. Historic. Potential for subdivision. We could have turned it into millions. Her voice was steady, cold, measured. Not like a daughter-in-law, but a broker finalizing a deal. Elliot bristled. So all along, this was your plan, to push Evelyn out, strip her of title, and flip the property. Melissa's lips tightened. Daniel never had the stomach for it. He hesitated, worried about appearances. I made the moves. I'm not ashamed. Someone had to think long term. Her words cut deeper than Daniel's anger ever had. At least he had acted from pride and impulse. Melissa was deliberate, composed, and calculating. I stepped closer, voice lowered, meant only for her ears. Melissa, you married into this family. You held my hand when I was sick, when the hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. You smiled across holiday tables, shared stories that made me laugh. And now you look me in the eye and admit you try to erase me for gain. Her jaw stiffened, but for a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe hesitation. You didn't have to become this, I said, voice calm but unwavering. You didn't have to teach Daniel to betray me. You didn't have to see the lake house as a ledger entry. You made that choice. She lifted her chin, defiant. I chose survival. The world doesn't reward kindness. It rewards boldness. You've lived your life being kind, Evelyn. And look where it's left you, alone in a hotel room, abandoned by the boy you raised. I want an up like that. Her words struck like knives, sharp but with a twisted logic. In them, I saw a mirror of fear. Had ambition driven her to become what she feared I would be? Elliot took a step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. My voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. You're wrong. Kindness is not weakness. It doesn't erase us. It roots us. You call it sentiment. I call it dignity. And dignity is something money can never buy back once it's lost. Her lips parted, as if to argue, but no sound followed. For a moment, I glimpsed the woman she might have been, the one who laughed over burnt pie crusts, who once asked for my chicken soup recipe. That version of her flickered, then vanished beneath the steel mask of ambition. I left her with a single line. Melissa, you don't need to become the very person you claim to despise. But if you keep walking this road, you'll find yourself alone. She turned, phone in hand, thumb moving quickly across the screen. The trace of softness I had glimpsed was gone. Back in the hotel that night, I replayed the conversation in my mind. The Dashcam had shown Daniel's cruelty, but Melissa's words revealed a different darkness. Ambition dressed as necessity. I wrote in my notebook. She says she chose survival, but survival at what cost? I closed it slowly, letting the question linger. Forgiveness felt like a jar on a shelf. Should I open it for her, or keep it closed to protect myself from the storm that had nearly swallowed me before? The answer did not come that night, only the stillness, and in it, I wrestled with the conflict. Not whether I would keep the lake house, but whether I could protect my heart from hardening as hers had. The notary's office smelled of ink and old coffee, the scent of records and whispered confessions. Elliot had arranged a meeting there, away from the courthouse drama. When Clara entered, her shoulders square, but eyes heavy, I knew something had shifted. She carried a manila folder pressed tightly to her chest. Without greeting, she set it on the table between us. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she opened it. These are every email, every document Melissa sent me. Promises, drafts, instructions. She thought she could buy my silence. I almost let her. The notary, a solemn man with glasses perched on his nose, glanced at Elliot and nodded. Clara slid the papers forward. I'm entering these into record under oath. I won't carry them in secret anymore. The clerk stamped the first page. Each thud felt like a door closing on betrayal. Clara turned to me, eyes searching mine. "Nora," she said, voice catching. I was weak. I thought if I looked the other way, I could keep my peace. Melissa dangled a number, enough to make my future feel safer. But then I remembered every late-night conversation we had after Henry died. And I couldn't do it. Not to you. You sitting at my kitchen table, tea steaming between us, telling me you didn't know how you'd raised Daniel alone, that our friendship couldn't be measured in dollars. Those words cracked something open in me. Not anger, but grief I hadn't allowed myself to feel. To know my friend had faltered stung, yet here she was standing in the full light, saying it aloud. The notary finished his stamping, sliding the folder back toward Elliot. Clara exhaled, a long breath that seemed to shed a weight she had carried too long. "I need you to hear me say it," she said, voice steadying. "For a moment, I failed you, but I will not fail you again. I'd rather lose everything than sell our history to someone who sees only numbers, only profit." Silence filled the room, heavy and firm. I reached across the table, my hand covering hers, warm and grounding. No speeches, no rehearsed forgiveness, just a touch that carried years of shared history. She pressed back, lips tight, tears caught at the corners of her eyes but refused to fall. Elliot cleared his throat, practical but gentler than usual. "This testimony seals it. Melissa's paper trail now belongs to us, not her. Judges respect when someone comes forward willingly. Clara, you've done more than you know." We left the office together, stepping into the late afternoon light. The sun hung low, brushing the tops of buildings with gold. Clara lingered at the curb, and for a moment we were silent, side by side. Finally, she said, almost to herself, "It's strange how temptation sounds like reason until you speak it aloud. Then it just feels empty." I watched her, seeing not the moment she wavered, but the courage it took to return to truth. "We've both learned something about loyalty," I said softly. "It's not never failing. It's coming back when it counts." Her hand brushed mine again, not for reassurance, but as a quiet pledge. Then she walked toward her car, steps lighter than when she had arrived. As I watched her drive away, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not suspicion, but gratitude. Her faltering had mirrored my own fears, the knowledge that even those closest could bend under pressure. But her return reminded me of something deeper. Loyalty tested and redeemed is stronger than loyalty never challenged. That evening, I opened my notebook and wrote one line beneath Henry's letter. "Friendship worth keeping is never for sale." My hand was steady. The hotel room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the radiator and the rain tapping against the window. I set aside the case files Elliot had left me and reached for the dented tin of chamomile tea I carried with me. Its lid was loose, its edges worn, but it held a comfort beyond measure. Tonight, I needed it for something more than tea. I pulled out a sheet of pale cream stationery, edges faintly yellowed, the kind I had kept since Henry passed. My hand hovered over the page, then slowly began to write. "Dear Daniel." The letters came halting, careful, each one carrying decades of memory. I had never written to him like this. Not to remind, not to instruct, not to plead. This letter was different. It was the story of us, the parts he had chosen to forget. When you were 5, you clung to my hand so tightly on your first day of school, I feared I might bruise your tiny fingers. You looked up at me with those wide brown eyes and whispered, "Don't leave me." I promised I wouldn't, and I never did. Through scraped knees, broken homework, midnight fevers, and the long, silent nights after your father died, I never left you. I paused, feeling the tight ache behind my eyes, but I kept writing. I worked nights at the diner, mornings at the library, so you could have cleats for Little League and lunch money to never feel out of place. I skipped meals so you could have seconds. I stitched your Halloween costumes by hand, even when my fingers were raw from dishwater and cleaning supplies. Every sacrifice I made, I carried as armor, not regret, because you were mine, my boy, my only. The pen trembled in my hand, but I forced myself to keep going. Somewhere along the way, you forgot, or maybe forgetting was easier. You stopped seeing me as the woman who protected you and loved you fiercely, and started seeing me as an obstacle, a signature to push, a name to erase. You said I needed a lesson, but Daniel, my life has been one long lesson in love. And love is the one thing you never chose to learn. I drew a shaky breath, the ink threatening to blur on the paper, but I pressed on. I don't write this to shame you. I don't write it to change you. I cannot. I write it for myself, to lay down the weight I have carried for years, waiting for you to notice me again, waiting for an apology, waiting for you to remember who I was before you try to make me less. That waiting ends here. I folded the paper once, then opened it and kept writing. I loved you as a mother should. I still love you, in a way a flame still burns even knowing it might be snuffed out. But I will not let that love undo me. I will not let it excuse cruelty or erase my dignity. You taught me, yes, you taught me that sometimes love must stand silent, draw a line, and refuse to be moved. That lesson is mine to keep. I sign it simply, Mom. When the ink dried, I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my old tea tin, the lid clicking shut like a seal. The letter wasn't meant to be sent. It was a truth spoken only to the page, resting among ordinary objects as a reminder, a boundary, a pivot. I sat back, tea cooling at my side, and felt something shift. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't forgiveness. It was release. For months, maybe years, I had waited, waiting for Daniel to call with remorse, for Melissa to see me as more than a signature on a deed, for someone to restore my worth. Tonight, I realized I could restore it myself. I'm not waiting anymore. I whispered to the quiet room. Outside, the rain had slowed, leaving the city hushed. I touched the tin one last time and slid it onto the shelf above the desk, letting it sit among ordinary things, a reminder of what I had reclaimed. That night, I dreamed of Henry at the lake house, hammer in hand, fixing a loose step on the porch. He looked up and smiled the way he always did when he wanted to say, "You've got this, Evelyn." When I woke, there was no ache in my chest, only steadiness, the kind that comes when you stop asking why and start saying enough. I brewed a fresh cup of tea, holding the warmth between my palms. The letter remained folded in its tin, and for the first time since that storm, I knew I wasn't writing to Daniel anymore. I was writing back to myself. The courtroom felt colder that morning, though maybe that was only me. I sat at the same worn oak table where I had sat so many times before, hands folded over Henry's will. The paper had softened from weeks of handling, the edges smudged faintly, but the words still carried their weight. I kept my hands on the will like a lifeline. Daniel walked in with his attorney, his suit wrinkled, his jaw tight, the weight of his own misdeeds visible in the slump of his shoulders. Melissa followed a step behind, her heels echoing sharply against the marble, her face set like stone. Neither of them met my eyes. Judge Reynolds adjusted his glasses and called the courtroom to order. His voice was calm, yet every word carried an unshakable authority. We are convened to issue judgment in the matter of Evelyn Carter versus Daniel and Melissa Carter. Elliot sat to my right, Claire to my left, their presence steadying me more than any words could. The judge's voice continued, deliberate and clear. The court finds that Daniel Carter unlawfully withdrew funds totaling $218,000 from accounts belonging solely to Mrs. Carter. Evidence of forged mortgage applications constitutes fraud. Mr. Carter is ordered to return the full sum within 60 days. Failure to do so will result in garnishment of wages and assets. A murmur passed through the room. Daniel's shoulders sagged. For once, he did not argue or lash out. He stared at the table as if it could swallow him whole. The judge turned to Melissa. Melissa Carter, the emails entered into record voluntarily by witness Clara Carter demonstrate your involvement and intent to defraud. Your case is referred to the County Financial Crimes Division for independent investigation. Melissa's composure faltered slightly. Her lips parted, eyes flicking between Daniel and me, but no sound came. As for the property known as the Carter Lake House, the judge continued. Title remains with Mrs. Evelyn Carter in accordance with her late husband's will. Any liens or encumbrances placed under forged authority are nullified. The words settled over me quietly, not triumphant, not vindictive, just steady and real. Judge Reynolds closed his folder. This case is not about victory or defeat. It is about restoration. Mrs. Carter, your dignity was challenged, your trust betrayed. Today, the law acknowledges that harm and provides remedy. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. Reporters shuffled. Pens scratched. Murmurs spread through the room. Daniel slumped in his chair, his attorney whispering urgently, but he made no move. Melissa gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. I stayed seated, my hands resting on Henry's will, tracing the uneven ink of his signature. I did not smile. I did not cry. I just breathed. Clara placed her hand over mine, warm and steady. "It's done," she whispered. Elliot leaned close. "You held your ground, Evelyn. That's what matters." I nodded, eyes fixed on the folded paper beneath my hands. This victory was quiet. No banners, no cheers. Yet it ran deep, steadier than any applause. When I finally rose, the courtroom was nearly empty. Daniel glanced at me once, hollow eyes, lips moving as though forming words that would not come. I walked past him without a word. Melissa turned sharply away, jaw tight in denial. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and cool. Reporters surged with cameras and questions. "Mrs. Carter, do you have a statement? How do you feel about the verdict?" I lifted a hand, gentle but firm. There's nothing more to say. I told them. The judge has spoken. I kept walking, letting the crisp autumn air settle around me. Back at the hotel that evening, I brewed a cup of tea and set Henry's will back into its worn folder, placing it on the desk next to the tin that now held my letter to Daniel. One page carried the weight of the past, the other a farewell I would never send. Together, they felt like a circle finally complete. I didn't crave celebration or applause. I only wanted quiet, the kind that lets your lungs expand without guilt or fear. As I sipped my cooling tea, I realized justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes like a lake at dawn, still, reflective, and steady, revealing only the truth. The next morning, fog rolled over the lake as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside the house. It smelled faintly of cedar and old wood, with just a hint of dust that had settled during my absence. I placed my bag on the entry bench and stood still listening. No voices, no hurried plans, no footsteps I didn't trust, just the clock ticking in the hall. I tied a scarf over my hair, rolled up my sleeves, and opened every window. Crisp air swept through the rooms. I filled a bucket with warm water and vinegar, found the squeegee beneath the sink, and started with the largest window overlooking the lake. Each stroke cleared a pane of sky, letting sunlight spill across the rug in broad, clean swaths. I worked methodically, stacking magazines, folding blankets, and sorting drawers where stray screws and batteries had claimed refuge. On the mantel, I returned Henry's framed photo to its place, pressing a finger lightly to the glass. His smile looked just as I remembered, practical, gentle, steadfast. By mid-morning, Elliot pulled into the driveway, ladder strapped to his truck. He squinted at the porch roof. "That flashing has annoyed me for years," he said. "Time to fix it." He climbed, methodical and focused, while I handed him nails and a tin of sealant. Each hammer strike felt like a promise set into the house itself. When he came down, we shared coffee on the steps, fingers brushing the carved initials Henry and I had left on the railing. "Still holding," he said. I nodded, feeling the weight of that phrase in my chest. Clara arrived in the afternoon, carrying a mason jar of zinnias from her garden and a paper sack of ripe pears. She set the flowers on the kitchen table, brushing my cheek with hers. "They're a little wild," she said, arranging the stems. "But the house could use some color that isn't from a signature line." We laughed softly. We cleaned together, our movements almost silent. She wiped the cabinet doors while I organized spices, tossing jars whose labels had faded with age. Elliot reattached a loose screen and tightened the back door latch. By the time we finished, the house felt lighter, not only because the dust was gone, but because our hands had spoken in a language older than any courtroom. "This place is kept." I slid Henry's will into the top drawer of his desk, beneath the blotter where he had once balanced his accounts. Beside it, I placed a small tin holding my unsent letter to Daniel. 2 promises, one for the past, one for myself. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the cleaned windows, landing in squares across the floor. I stepped into one, feeling the soft warmth beneath my feet, like a child in a hopscotch square. The faint scent of the lake mixed with pine sap, grounding me. Somewhere out on the water, a boat motor rumbled, then settled into a steady, calm hum. Elliot found the broken link in the porch swing chain and replaced it with a sturdy new one. "Give it a try," he said. I lower myself onto the swing, pushing off lightly with my feet. It rocked gently, the wood murmuring against the metal, carrying a rhythm that seemed to settle the house itself. From that vantage, the lake stretched before me. The dock, the rocky cove where Daniel had once chased minnows, the quiet stretch of shoreline where Henry had shown him how to skip stones. Memories didn't pierce me anymore. They rested beside me like an old companion. Clara poured tea into chipped mugs that felt like they had always belonged in this kitchen. We sipped slowly, watching the sunlight move across the lake. "Are you going to paint any of these walls?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "I want to live here first, just as it is." By evening, when they left, the sky had cleared to a soft blue that made the water seem new. I wandered through the house, turning on lamps one by one, listening to each bulb warm the rooms. There were no toasts or celebrations, just the quiet satisfaction of order returning where chaos had tried to linger. Before bed, I stood at the largest window, the glass clean and clear. My reflection merged with the lake outside. I lifted a hand and touched both, feeling the woman I had become and the world I had fought to protect. The house seemed to breathe with me. That week, Elliot stayed later than usual. He fixed gutters, patched the shed roof, and oiled the pantry hinges until even the smallest squeaks were gone. One evening, as we sat on the swing with the lake stretching silently before us, he cleared his throat. "I should have stepped in sooner," he admitted. His voice was rough, but the regret beneath it was unmistakable. When Daniel started pulling away, when Melissa circled like a predator, he had borne the weight silently, protecting me as he always had. I held my warm tea and said, "I don't hold that against you." He shook his head. "No, I hold it against myself. You carried too much alone." I reached across and rested a hand on his arm. "Not anymore," I said. After that, his visits were no longer just for repairs. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he simply sat with me by the fire, recounting childhood mischief and long-forgotten pranks. Occasionally we spoke not at all, sharing a quiet only siblings can hold without strain. Clara became a regular presence as well. Every Thursday, she arrived with fresh bouquets, usually gathered from wild roadside blooms. "I can't keep my kitchen this cluttered," she'd say, but I knew she brought them to brighten mine. She would fuss with the arrangements, lean back with a sigh, and remark, "This house feels lighter already." We fell into gentle rhythms. Afternoon tea on the porch, walks along the dock on Sundays, evenings where she read the local paper aloud while I mended curtains. Sometimes she would apologize again for almost siding with Melissa. I would shake my head. "You came back when it mattered. That's what counts." One Saturday morning, a knock at the door announced the Callahans from 2 houses down, carrying a casserole dish. Behind them, the Perkins children held a basket of apples. Word travels fast in a small lakeside town. "We just wanted you to know," Mrs. Callahan said, "you're not alone out here. If you need anything, you call." They didn't linger, but their visit left warmth in its wake. Over the following days, more neighbors came by. Some brought food, others shared stories, each gesture a reminder of what mattered most: recognition and connection. They no longer saw me as the woman betrayed by her own son. They saw Evelyn Carter, the one who had kept the lake house standing, whose roots ran deep, and who had finally reclaimed her place. At first, I hesitated. My life had always revolved around family by blood, bending under its weight until I nearly broke. Opening myself to neighbors felt like breaking an unspoken code. But slowly, I understood that family isn't only inherited. Sometimes it is chosen, or perhaps it chooses you. The truth showed itself in small, steady gestures. Elliot leaving his reading glasses on the counter as if he belonged here. Clara placing her spare keys on my hook, just in case. The Perkins children racing down the dock calling, "Miss Evelyn, come watch this," as they skipped stones. Each of these moments wove themselves into a tapestry thicker than bitterness, warmer than old regrets. One evening, as the sun sank behind the pines, Elliot leaned against the porch post, the fading light painting his face gold. "You know," he said, "Daniel may never see what he lost. But you haven't lost everything. You've built something else here." I looked around, the house smelling of cedar and fresh vinegar, the flowers Clara had placed along the sill, the casserole dish waiting to be returned, the echo of laughter from the Perkins yard. "A different kind of family," I whispered. Elliot nodded. "Sometimes the stronger kind." Later, I scribbled in my journal, "Blood ties can fray. Chosen ties can hold." I closed the book and set on the nightstand, feeling for the first time in years that family wasn't a word stitched with obligation and disappointment. It was presence, loyalty, and shared light across a table. As autumn deepened, the house brimmed not just with memories, but new ones. A potluck spilling onto the porch with half the neighborhood crowded in. A late-night storm where Clara stayed over, and we listened to the rain drum the roof, grateful for shelter. Elliot chopping wood out back, whistling off-key. The lake mirrored it all, calm and wide, as if reminding me that survival isn't just enduring storms alone. It's who stands beside you afterward. I realized I no longer waited for Daniel's call. I no longer measure my worth by his recognition. My circle was here already. Messy, imperfect, but real. Chosen and true. Rain-stitched silver lines across the window. I sat by the glass, a wool blanket draped over my knees. The house was quiet except for the kettle's soft sigh. The porch light threw a halo across the steps. Outside, the world was wet and honest. Inside, I matched it. I remember that first storm, standing on the road shoulder as water ran into my shoes, darkness pressing in. The sound of Daniel's tires leaving, the quiet slam of a door. Tonight, another door closed, but not on me. This one closed on the part of my life that waited for permission to belong. The old umbrella hung from its hook, dry and polished by years of use. No longer a shield against someone else's storm. It was a symbol that I had come home and opened the door myself. The kettle clicked off. I poured tea into the blue mug Henry had favored, its small chip along the rim catching the lamplight. Steam curled into the air. I breathed it in, letting the warmth settle my hands. Across the room, Henry's will rested in the desk drawer beside the tin holding my folded, unsent letter. 2 quiet anchors. 2 choices made. People still ask how I feel about the verdict. I tell them the truth. Justice arrived softly, like the end of rain, not with a parade, but with a clearing. The air felt different afterward. The ground beneath held more than it had before, and there was a cost, but it was mine to bear on my own terms. Yes, I paid it. So did Daniel. So did Melissa. What remains now is what can weather storms. Tonight, I speak to the boy and the man in one, though the room holds only me. You said I needed a lesson. Today, the lesson belongs to you. I have learned only this. Silence carries weight. It took a lifetime to understand. When I stopped arguing, truth found its own path. Neighbors visit now with stories, small favors, baskets of apples, or freshly baked bread. Elliot leaves a newspaper on the porch with a note. Call only if the roof hums. Clara brings flowers that lean every which way and a deck of cards for rainy afternoons. Their laughter echoes in the walls. This house, once at risk, has become a refuge again, not just for me, but for anyone who needs a chair, a warm cup, and a place to remember who they are. I turn the lamp low and let the rain carry me back to simpler images. Daniel's small hand in mine on his first day of school. Henry sanding the porch rail. My younger self folding coupons at the kitchen table. The long winter when the furnace coughed and I coaxed it back to life. None of it disappears because pain arrived. Memory, like wood, can be restored. Time, not apologies, brings back the grain. I do not pretend the ache is gone. I am a mother. My heart still reaches toward the phone, hoping for mercy. But I no longer bargain with that ache. I set a cup at the second place at the table in case a good day arrives, and I live my life fully if it doesn't. Boundaries are not bars. They're the door frames that shape a room. Through the window, the rain softens to mist. My reflection is plain in the glass. Time has left its marks in my eyes and mouth, but it has returned something steadier as well. A spine I trust, a voice I do not need to raise. I am no longer standing roadside, waiting. I stand in the doorway, light behind me, the room ready. I rise, cross to the door, and check the latch. The umbrella hangs there, patient and familiar. Full circle, I think, from the woman left in the rain to the woman who keeps a light on for others. From weathered to weatherproof. The lesson arrives quietly. I blow out the candle on the sill and let the gentle darkness receive my final words. A benediction for anyone who needs it, including myself. You said I needed a lesson. Today, it is yours. I have learned only this. Silence has its own weight.